Hello and welcome. This is the Showing Up to Your Life podcast, and my name is Art Burns. I'm really excited to be here with you today. For all of you who are just first finding this podcast today, this is where I show up here every day and talk about showing up, right? I talk about ways in which we can optimize ourselves to be present, and in that presence to have a ability to connect to others, and in that ability to connect to others, what we're doing is we're bringing ourselves a great deal of health, mental health, emotional health, physical health, but we're also impacting those around us. And so that's what we talk about here, and I'm really glad to have you here. I'm switching up the intro today, doing something a little different. I hope you all enjoy it. And I just want to, as always, as I always say, I'm very excited to be here with you all today. But for some reason, I just felt like I wanted to switch up the intro. At some point, I know I've been threatening this for like 2 years now, but at some point I'll have a pre-recorded intro and we can be more professional with our podcast here. But, that'll come. That'll come. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. Today I want to talk about something that I did this Facebook post the other day that just blew up, and I want to talk about that because it really does apply to all of what I talk about here. Most of what I talk about here. And as I often do, I'm going to use sort of my own story, my own sort of experience to illustrate some things for you. Okay, and that's kind of what this is all about, this podcast, right? It's like I have lived through this, right? I have been in that place where, stress was literally killing me, where I had no, personal connections of any kind. I was, mean, unkind, really, really just very focused on my own success and at the expense of whoever it needed to be at the expense of. That was like the way I roll. And so I use the stories of my past to illustrate how bad things have been for me and to show you that, and I shouldn't use the word bad, of course, because we talk about non-judging awareness here, but how damaging my life was to me and to others around me for so long. And then I like to show you that it is really the practices that we do here, that I talk about here, that has really, brought me to the person I am today. Now there are some other things involved, and that's what we're going to get into today a little bit. But really, what it's about is using the practices that I talk about here, right? Just very simple practices, just daily, just taking some time to just still yourself and just be. Right? John Kabat-Zinn talks about, I talk about this all the time. John Kabat-Zinn says that we should change the name of our species to human doings instead of human beings, because it's so rare that we just be, right? And if we take some time to just be every day, well, then there's some very, very important benefits that come from that. There's the benefit of integration, which leads to, better health in our, again, mental health, emotional health, physical health. There is, when we do build that integration, cultivate that integration within the various regions of our brain and also between the brain and the body, it also then cultivates an integration between ourselves and others, right? And that is because one of the things that arises, one of the qualities that arises from an integrated brain is kindness and compassion. And kindness and compassion are the connections that we have to others. So you can see that it really is, it's very, very basic stuff. And it's very simple too, right? But if it was easy, then you wouldn't need a guy like me. You wouldn't need hundreds of books like I have behind me. You wouldn't need, the countless teachings and podcasts and YouTube channels and websites and schools and retreats and all this stuff, right? If it was easy, you wouldn't need all of that, because if it was easy, we could just, maybe it was a pill we could take, or maybe we just, kind of, cut our hair a certain way and then it would all be better, right? But it doesn't work that way. Right. And it does take some effort, but if you're willing to put, and it's, you're talking about minimal effort, right? If you're willing to put as little as 5 minutes a day into this work, I personally can guide you with 5 minutes a day. I can guide you to a place where you start to see these results. And then the thing happens. Then it's like that magical, beautiful time where once you start seeing the results, now it's like, oh, get out of my way. I got to practice my mindfulness, right? There is nothing that's going to keep you from practicing at that point. So it really does it's just about getting through the first few weeks, couple of months, maybe. That's it. And then once you're at that point, it's like, that's the roller coaster. Now you're heading down and you're putting your hands up and you're screaming at the top of your lungs in glee. And you're starting to see some real improvements and some real, health improvements, real personal connection improvements, probably success in many areas of your life where perhaps you were frustrated by failure before, right? That's the thing. This all, it gets into every area of our lives. It really does. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, right? And first though, I want to say, like, for any of you who might be doubting what I'm saying, right, that it's just a matter of just committing to. Now, honestly, when I first started, I mean, it was probably about 5 minutes or so a day, and then pretty soon after that, it became more of like a 20-minute a day kind of thing. So I will concede that ultimately, yes, I would love to see everyone do about 20 minutes a day of formal practice, and then couple that with some, pardon me, my hair's kind of warm down here. Couple that with some informal practices and compassion practices that don't take any more time, right? We just kind of weave those into what you're already doing in your life. I'm describing my coaching program here, right? And so if you can just commit, again, in the beginning to 5 minutes a day, I promise with the right coaching, you can certainly achieve everything that I have achieved over the last, like almost 10 years now that I've been on this journey, right? And if you doubt me, this is where I want to get into my Facebook post from the other day. So the Facebook post itself, right, was kind of, it was geared to kind of highlight something that was at the end of it, right? But I want to talk about the beginning of the Facebook post first. Okay, so the Facebook post is as follows. It was very, very simple, and usually the most effective ones are simple, right? And so what I said in my Facebook post was that around 10 years ago. Okay, and it's going to be 10 years in almost exactly 1 month, like probably 3 weeks from now. It's going to be exactly 10 years that I gave up drinking. Okay, now, for anyone of you who have listened to this podcast and heard me talk about my story, you know that when I say gave up drinking, that means that was a very significant life change for me. Okay, I was truly, and I mean, as much an alcoholic as you could possibly be, right? And of course, alcoholism is like the umbrella. It's kind of like the emotions, right? Like you feel one emotion that you notice, but there's so many other emotions involved, right? So to say that somebody was an alcoholic, especially in my context, they were also a drug abuser. They were also a sexaholic. They were also for me, it was also workaholism. For me, it was also, I had addiction to spending money and all that kind of stuff. So I say alcoholism, but assume that it's like this whole big, ugly jumble of addictions. But even past the addictions, just really self-damaging behavior, right? That's what it really is, right? And that's what any addiction is, right? Dr. Gabor Mate defines an addiction as something you do, even though you know that it's harmful to you, you do it repeatedly without stop, right? Like that's what addiction is. And so all of those things that I described certainly fit under that definition, right? And so 10 years ago, right, I decided, and it happens, again, just like I talk about the 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes a day of meditation. Like, don't think about doing, and even think about 1 minute. Don't think about doing 20 minutes a day. That's really hard. Think about 1 minute a day, okay? Maybe 5 minutes. Like, when I first start with people, I don't let them commit to more than 5 minutes a day of meditation. And I tell them, if you want to do more, do 5 minutes, get up, have a glass of water, and come back in and do 5 more minutes. Okay, but just in that same sort of fashion, in that same sort of approach, if you will, one day, this is how I gave up drinking. This is the whole thing. Right now, I had been to 12-step meetings in the past. I had never done the 12-step program. I'd been to a couple of meetings. I never felt like it was me. I've always felt like, okay, I don't belong here. This is not right somehow. Not that it was, wrong for all the people there. It was just not right for me. And so the way I came to it, right, was again just in the same kind of vein. I knew that I had like 3 beers. I think it was 3 beers exactly in the back of my refrigerator, right, or probably in the front of the refrigerator, honestly. 3 bottles of beer that were left from the last time I bought 12 beers or whatever, right? Because that's the thing. Even sitting around watching TV and staying in and not drinking, right, meant that I would have 7 or 8 beers on any given night, right? Like that's how it was, right? And so I knew that if I just didn't go buy any more beer, well, then I couldn't drink because I knew that those 3 would certainly not do. And there's no way that 3 beers is enough. So I just said, well, I just won't buy any beer today. And I will just make, just like the 12-step program talks about, it's one day at a time, right? And I said, I'm just not going to buy any beer today. I'm not going to buy any beer tomorrow. And then the next day, as each day I woke up and I said, I'm not going to buy any beer today. And it was hard and it hurt. And it was, I'm not going to lie, I probably smoked a lot of cannabis during those first few weeks. I don't remember specifically. I certainly was a grumpy son of a gun. I certainly was, who knows what else I was doing. I was probably really not very pleasant to be around, but here I was. Right. And so one day turned into a week turned into 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, a month, and then those 3 beers just sitting there the whole time, to the point where actually at a certain point, my wife, bless her heart, she realized that I was out of the woods, as they say, like I was done. Because after a few weeks, the physical addiction is over, right? And it was never really a physical addiction anyway. It was more of an emotional addiction for me. Psychological addiction, right? Because I was trying to dull the pain that I'm going to talk about soon. But the idea, though, is that, we, again, just taking it day by day, right? And day by day, the physical need for it just kind of disappears. And then you just now you're just living life as somebody who doesn't drink. Right. And it's pretty amazing. But again, at no point did I make some kind of big announcement or do some kind of thing. I'm just not going to buy any beer today. That's literally how it started. Okay. And so since then, and by the way, I was saying that my wife then, when it was clear that I was out of the woods, and she asked me, she's like, okay, so what do we do with those beers in the fridge? Like, should we just toss them? Because she was like, I can make some beer battered shrimp or something like that. And I was like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I don't need them anymore, so go ahead. I'm not feeling tempted. It's okay. I don't need them. Go ahead. I swear, I had that fork. She made the beer batter shrimp, and I had the thing like this close to my face, and I was like, whoa. I put it down. I pushed the plate away. I was like, I love you so much for making this for me, but I can't do it. The smell of beer was enough I was like, that is dangerous. I want nothing to do with that. That's how significantly I had changed within just a couple of months. That's important to recognize, okay? So then shortly after that, so here's the way the Facebook post went. I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place here today. So the Facebook post said, around 10 years ago, I gave up alcohol, and I said, oh my gosh, this is it. This is everything. I can't believe this is wonderful. And a little while after that, a couple of years after that, I gave up. I went completely 100% vegan, and I lost 100 pounds of body weight. And at that point, I said, this is incredible. This is what I've been waiting for. A couple of years after that, I took up mindfulness. And it's not really, the timeline isn't really correct. It was a few years. Things are a little more overlapping, but this is how I wrote it in the Facebook post. And so a few years after that, I took up a practice of mindfulness and compassion. And I said, wow, now I understand everything. What took me so long to do this? But then a few months ago, as my Facebook post continues, I recognized for the first time my trauma And I sat down and I said, oh boy. Right now, this Facebook post has gotten something like 150 likes or something. I mean, it's crazy. Like, that's a lot for me. I'm not a viral guy, Um, and so the next part of that Facebook post was the significance of changing my diet, which again, that was a huge change for me. I mean, that was not something that was, I was a guy who ate, bacon and egg with cheese on the in the morning, maybe a turkey sandwich or a chicken sandwich, and then like a hamburger or pizza or sausage and peppers or something like it was meat, dairy, 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 dairy all the time. And I gave it up, right? But again, it wasn't like I said, okay, I'm just going to stop everything. I'm going to change everything all at once. No, that is really, really hard to do. So what I did is I went out one night and I went to the diner, which was the only thing open at that time, and I got 2 grilled cheese sandwiches. And after that, I said, this is it. This is the last dairy I'm ever going to eat. And it was. Shortly after that, I continued on because at that point, the meat and stuff didn't even taste good anymore. So I was very easy at that point, just give it all up. Within about 6 months, the whole process, right? And I became vegan, and I lost over 100 pounds, right? And then again, as I've told you here before, right? my life before I realized mindfulness, right? My life was absolute turmoil, absolute chaos. Like I was the most busy, monkey-minded guy you could possibly ever know. And I was the most unkind guy you could ever know. And I was just completely self-centered and completely just absorbed in my own self and my own, like I used to just curse people out all the time. And within like a few months, I found myself, feeling this compassion and understanding that, that it's not about being unkind and being mean. I hope that sound doesn't bother everybody. My office here is steaming. It might be because I'm revealing some really heavy stuff here. So anyway, so this was all very, very, very hard. And you know what I told my wife last night was that, for most people, any one of these 4 things, right? The alcoholism, or stopping alcohol, changing my diet completely, losing 100 pounds, and developing the practice, the very, very solid practice of mindfulness and compassion, right? Like any one of those 4 things would be a lifetime achievement for many people, right? But your coach here has done all 4. Right. So but that's the thing, right? Because what the post really was about was the trauma, right? And even in writing the post, and this is what trauma does to us, right? Even writing the post, I didn't even notice any of this rock star level stuff that I have accomplished. Like that didn't even occur to me. The whole post was about the fact that now I recognize my trauma, and it's like this wave that's like eclipsing the sun and about to crash on me. And that's what trauma does to us. See, that's the thing. So what trauma becomes, right, according to this amazing human being, Peter Levine. You might have heard of him before. This is just one of his books about trauma. And talking about, like you'll hear a lot that trauma, is something we store in our bodies, right? And that's what Bessel van der Kolk in his seminal book, The Body Keeps the Score, right, talks about, is that trauma lives in our body. And so what Dr. Levine says is that can be called an implicit memory. Okay, so an implicit memory is different from an explicit memory, obviously. So an explicit memory is you saying, like if I ask you, this is a great one. This comes from Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson in The Whole Brainchild, right? So they talk about explicit versus implicit memory. Explicit memory would be like if I said to you, do you remember the first time you changed a diaper? Right, if you're a parent, right? And of course, we all have that story, right? Where it's just now it's not necessarily accurate, but we're gonna remember some really disgusting stuff and this really like messy thing and everything like that, right? But the implicit memory is the way you change a diaper, right? So if you're a parent, again, by the time your child was like a couple of months old, you no longer had to think about what you were doing when you changed the diaper, right? You just walked up, you grabbed the thing, you did the thing, done, right? And like you didn't have to think about it, right? That's because you implicitly remember all the steps, right? It's not something you have to think about. You don't have to say, okay, hold the baby down, undo the old diaper, fold it in such a way that I don't get a mess everywhere, put it in the diaper genie, try not to whiff that smell because it's horrible, lift the baby's legs, wipe it, put this thing, I don't have to walk myself through all those steps because my implicit memory knows all of it, right? So when you deal with trauma specifically and especially childhood trauma, right? The trauma itself, the way that you were treated by the person who, brought this trauma. And so my trauma is through physical and emotional abuse as a child, right? This could be said about sexual abuse as a child too, right? Or any, whatever it is, right? I'm sure there's many, many different ways that you could sort of fit into this thing, right? But what happens is, right, for me, right, it was just day after day after day after day after day as from 5 years old till, really, I mean, it was like the way my whole thing worked is because my parents split up for about 7 or 8 years and then got back together, which was traumatic in and of itself because anyway, the way trauma forms is it's not the event itself, right? It's how it's processed and how supported you are through the set. So even my parents getting back together caused much trauma for me, but it was like as soon as they got back together, like my mother a couple of years ago, I had gotten big enough that her physical abuse wasn't working anymore. So that had kind of petered out. And now, I mean, not stopped, but it was far less. And now we lived with my father, so he just kind of took the baton and just engaged in the emotional abuse, just just like cranked it up, so I just like had this continuous thing from 5 till about 18 years old whenever I moved out, let's say 17 years old. So what's that, 12 years of just solid trauma, boom 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 boom, every day. My mother beating the crap out of me, my father telling me I'm stupid, that's how it was, right? And so what that does is that becomes who I am. It becomes my personality. The implicit memories become my personality because everything has to pass through those implicit memories. Every thought, every decision, every, physical drive comes through that, right? And it happens, I mean, to this day. Okay, now I just told you all the work that I've done on myself, right? And even just like a couple of years ago, I was in an employment situation where, this person like called my name from across like outside the office a little bit. So it was like a little further away. So he used a little bit of a raised voice. And immediately I was like, okay, yes, sorry. I like jumped as though I was being yelled at. I was 50 years old, for crying out loud, or 49 years old at the time. And it still impacted me on that level, to the point where the guy came in and says, hey, Art, man, listen, I just want you to know I am never going to yell at you, man. Like that, I'm sorry you felt that way. Like that's how big it was. That this person who I barely knew, I'd known this guy for a couple of weeks, and he said that to me, right? And so it doesn't mean that you can't, like, and again, like, even as the destitute alcoholic I was, like at that time, I had the most beautiful life you could imagine. I mean, most people would look at my life and be like, dude, that guy is living the dream. At one point I had this like beautiful condo apartment in Midtown Manhattan. On the roof they had the pool and the health club. Oh my gosh, I used to take, like 4 or 5 girls at a time up there, and like just like I was living the dream, literally living the dream. It was like going to the beach at Art's house, an Art's apartment, and it was insane. I mean, it really was. It was truly incredible the way that my life looked at from the outside, right? But the problem is that I could not sustain it. And the reason I could not sustain it is because every decision I made had to come through this trauma. And because my trauma was so much, geared at and intensified around my self-worth, right? Like, it's really hard when your father, who left you for 12 years and then come back, and he's telling you, or left you for 8 years, whatever it was, and he tells you that you're stupid. Like 2 weeks after we moved into his apartment, which was traumatic enough. And most parents would probably think, well, maybe I should be, maybe I should help my son along in this process. No, instead, here's the story. So we were living, so I had been living downtown but going to school uptown. So I had to take like a 30-minute, 40-minute bus ride every morning to get to school as a, sixth, seventh, eighth grader, right? And in eighth grade, we moved up to my dad's house. And so my commute went from this 40-minute bus ride to like a 5-minute walk, right? For those precious few weeks at the end of the year. And then they sent me to school way downtown. So back into which was part of the punishment, I suppose. But so I had all this extra time in the morning. All of a sudden I had like a lot of extra time. So one morning I used to love the radio. I think, looking back, I think that the radio was a big part of my coping mechanism, right? Like the DJs of WPLJ in the 70s and 80s were like, they were my friends. They were the people who I could confide in. And they were the people who played this music for me that helped me to feel better. And so I was just sitting there listening to music because I had some time. And so my father pokes his head in my bedroom. He says to me, he's like, "What are you doing?" And he said nicely, not yelling or anything. He was always a nice guy. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just sitting here listening to music." "Why? Like, is something wrong with this kind of thing, And he goes, "You're just sitting there listening to music?" I was like, "Yeah. I have a few extra minutes before I have to leave for school, He goes, "Don't you think that's stupid?" I mean, even today, I can feel it. My like what you on the podcast don't see, but my shoulders just collapse, and that's how I feel every time I think of that, right? And he went on to say, like, "Oh, well, if you're listening to music while you're doing something, like something productive, that's fine, but just sitting there listening to music, that's stupid, and you're stupid for doing it," or something like that. And he walks out. Okay, guess I'll just walk to school then, just hang out outside doing nothing because I'm not welcome here to do nothing, And so that's the thing, right? Every decision, every thought, everything comes through that person who was told that he was stupid by the one person who's supposed to never tell me that, right? The one person who's supposed to guide me through my life. Anyway, so that's this Facebook post I did. And again, I think what it does is it shows a number of things. And so, anyway, I hope this was helpful to you. I think I kind of went off on a bunch of tangents here. I'm sorry for that. But again, it's hard to organize your thoughts. But I guess that ultimately the thing that I hope this podcast does is I hope that it inspires you to understand, for one thing, that you can make any changes in your life. Right? Like, I am living proof of that, right? If there's one thing that I can tell you is that you can change anything, and I can help you, right? The other thing that I feel like this particular episode is telling you is that you deserve to honor whatever happened to you in your childhood, right? Because for me, I grew up thinking like I had a pretty normal childhood, and in fact, I had better than most. Right? I was one of the lucky ones, right? I never considered myself abused. I never considered myself traumatized. But because I stopped the, really maladaptive coping mechanisms of drinking and drug use, and I stopped, just trying to kill myself with my diet, and I started to really open myself to understanding myself, right? Now I realize how much this really impacted everything. So if you're in your life, if you're having trouble, like And it could be like, having trouble adopting a meditation program, right? That could be part of your trauma. Other ways that your trauma could be showing up is, I just recently saw somebody who told me that, when you feel like, when you feel depressed, the minute you stop doing stuff, right? If you just feel like a huge like letdown, and you feel like you're panicking because you're so lazy, the minute you stop doing something, then that's probably a sign that you got some trauma to deal with. If you're having trouble keeping jobs, or keeping relationships, or just find yourself just kind of just not succeeding in a lot of things, a lot of little things in your life, like you can never be on time, I can never get my dry cleaning at the right time, I can never I'm always running out of groceries, I'm always forgetting things, all these things could be signs of trauma. And so it's important to recognize those areas which can help, which mindfulness and compassion will help you identify that. And then once you identify it, you have to honor it, even if you think like it was no big deal, because it was a big deal. And it impacts every single moment of your life. All right, everybody. I hope you found this helpful. As always, please reach out if I can help you in your journey to try to take control over your life and try to really show up in your authenticity. Okay? I can help you do that. All you got to do is click the link in the description. All right, everybody. I'll be back in tomorrow. Take care.